have two hands here right off the bat that are worth discussing. So, the 9-10 here, I think this goes kind of either way. I would typically probably lean fold here. But if you want to ISO here because you believe that the guy is weak, I think this is an okay hand, bottomish of range to do that with. And I like your sizing for the ISO, and I think it's reasonable. You can go either way. Definitely love it if it's 9-10 suited, obviously. Would never over limp with a hand like 9-10 suited. If you have like ace-2 suited, maybe like threes, you could over limp at some of these small stakes tournaments or in softer fields like Gary, like for instance, some of the ones we're playing with RPC, or maybe like a local Melbourne tournament that just doesn't have a lot of tough competition. If like you see a limp in front of you and you have a hand like 9-10 off, ace-jack off, 8-9 suited, I want you to either raise with them or fold. You don't want to just limp with those hands. But you could over limp with like ace-2 suited, ace-3 suited, twos, threes, fours, because I think those hands play well against a large number of people who are weak players who will let you see the flop. So like those are reasonable hands to over limp with. Someone like a long time ago, I swear in a book or something, said 8-9 suited is a good multi-way hand. That's just not true. Like if you had 8-9 suited where Yuho is here, and he limped, and then he goes 4 ways to the flop, and then the flop comes like 10-2-3, all his suit, and he flops a flush. Well, like that's like a nut end flop for us, yet our hand is still vulnerable, right? Because between the 3 opponents, there's a good chance that one of them has like the naked ace, the naked king, the naked queen, the naked jack, right? So, I think a hand like 8-9 suited, 7-8 suited that plays well against 1 or 2 people, not against 4 or 5 people. If you want to mess with 4 or 5 people, having ace-x suited, small pairs, hell, even king-x suited, I think would be reasonable because those hands go for like undeniable nutted hands, not ambiguously strong hands. That makes sense, right? So another thing I want to talk about here is you can go either way there, but like the ace king here is really interesting to me. So Yuho, what did like before you do it, before seeing what you do here? I don't know if you remember what you do or not, but what would you usually do here with the ace king? Do you
Raise
3-bet or flat?
3-bet every time.
And so why do you do that?
Well, our hand doesn't flop that well. Maybe like in some cases you could like call suited ace king, but I don't really like that. I think we should be like way deeper to just like flat ace king, and that would be suited for me every time. But I don't really do that ever.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with you that ace king suited, I am far more inclined to flat and see flops with because I think the hand will play better post flop. But I actually do think this is a spot where you could consider flatting, and I'll tell you why. When you 3-bet in this spot, right? So what sizing would you make it typically?
Probably, well, we are 50 blinds deep, so I would make it like 7 big blinds.
Yeah, I love your sizing. Okay, so I have a question for you. If you make it 7 blinds here, okay? My first question would be this. Let's say that like one of the guys, any of the guys after you, what do any of the people after you do with ace jack and ace queen now?
There's a call, I think. Or maybe like, I don't know, if we went like a little bit deeper, maybe like 4-bet bluff, but
yeah, it feels a little optimistic this early in a tournament. You don't think there's a chance that you're just making them fold those hands here?
Well, some like recreational players would probably call, but if I was like previously aggressive, I think they could like maybe 4-bet, but ace jack would fold here, but ace queen suited calling, ace jack suited maybe calling from the late position. So but let's say UTG +2, I think he will fold ace queen or ace jack at least.
Yes, and so another thing you said was too, you said something about so another thing I want you to think about rather is how you look though. Like let me ask you this: does it look like you would ever be bluffing if you 3-bet here to 7 blinds?
Here's a little secret. I'm just like I'm raising ace-x suited here like very often because I'm seeing folds.
Yes, no, hold on. No, I didn't ask that. I didn't ask if you would ever be bluffing here. I just asked if you believe it looks like you would be bluffing here to your opponents.
I'm not actually sure about because I have heard that.
But I'll tell you. I'll tell you the answer. It does not look like you are bluffing. You look very strong. Now, something you said a minute ago that stood out too is you said you'd been quite active. Okay, this is the biggest mistake good players make. They apply their own logic and reason to that of their opponents, right? So you're thinking here that your opponents are thinking rationally and paying attention like you. However, you are in the Big 22 right now. This is a tournament not unlike your local $250 tournament with a lot of soft spots, right? And unless you know that it's a regular that you're up against, I think you don't want to give them too much credit that they're like assessing you that well, you know?
Yeah, I guess that's a little bit problem of mine because I don't know what the other players think, or
Yes.
let's say recreational players is. So for me, it's I'm having hard time to like categorize them anywhere.
I'll tell you exactly how. And my mother said this to me when she taught me how to drive. She said, Grayson, pretend that that the people around you are either drunk and or stupid unless they give you reason to believe otherwise. And I think that's a fair policy in poker tournaments at certain levels, right? Now, quickly people can show you that they are adept. There are certain things we know that look familiar. We're like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing, right? But there's also things that, you know, can show that they don't know what they're doing, right? Typically like sizing errors, you know, things like that. So like we can read into that, right? But I do think it's important to note that like when you flat here, I think that sometimes people will squeeze and then suddenly you get in a really sweet back shoving spot. And I also think that in general, you know, I think you're right that the normal standard thing to do here is 3-bet. And I love your sizing. I think it's perfect as well. But I think that the concept I want you guys to think about is the whole idea of 3-betting for value in a spot where it just doesn't really look like you could be bluffing. Now, if you've been so outrageously aggressive that like everyone at the table clearly knows you're out of line, right? Then I'm okay with the 3-bet. Absolutely, right? But let's just assume you're relatively new to the table and there's not some sort of like, you know, excessive dynamic like that. I would actually consider flatting in this spot with ace king, merely because I feel when you make it 7 blinds, you just don't really look like you're bluffing, right? So I think if you 3-bet for value in a spot where it doesn't look like you have bluffs, it simply looks like you have only value. So like, let's go on and further and say, if you make it 7 blinds here, usually what will happen is this: everyone will fold and then the action will come back to under the gun, right? And so he's going to do one of two things. He's going to 4-bet or he's going to flat or fold, excuse me, one of 3 things, right? So when he flats, what do you think the first hand he is going to range you on post flop?
Maybe like jacks plus.
Yeah,
Ace
jacks
king
plus an ace king, right? This is literally the first hand he's going to think about, or at least consider us having, right? So like even when we hit an ace or a king after this, it's going to be hard to get paid unless he also hit the ace or queen and we have him out, or ace or king, we have him out kicked, right? So I think there's a perception gap here that I don't love, right? On top of that, let's say he 4-bets to like 18 blinds or he 4-bet shoves. 4-bet shoves a little bit better than him 4-betting to 18 blinds, which kind of, to be quite frank, scares the hell out of me.
It's probably a fault.
Right? Yeah, like I don't like it at all, right? So I think it's a weird spot where I agree that one of the huge downsides to flatting is obviously if it goes multi-way, this could become a nightmare, right? But I'm just looking at it. And also when you're going to 3-bet, don't just be like, you know, is it value? Is it bluff? Sometimes think to yourself, like, what is the utility of the 3-bet, right? So like when you make it 7 blinds here, what does that do for you? And when it comes to the original Razor, I don't think it really does a ton, because I think when he flats, I think he has a good feeling for what we have. And then I think when he 4-bets, like Marko just said, we might not even be in good shape anymore, right? Like, I don't know. It's kind of weird. But I also like what you said a lot, that if we have ace king suited, I'm so much more inclined to flat here because I think we can absorb more of that risk, knowing that we can flop a flush draw around 10% of the time, right? Yeah, it's a really interesting spot. I agree that typically people just go 3-bet here. You know, I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong in this spot, but I do think it's a spot where I want you guys to start thinking to yourself before you 3-bet with ace king, aces, kings, queens, jacks, any of your value hands. Just say, hey, can I be perceived as bluffing here? And if you cannot be perceived as bluffing in this spot, then I would consider not 3-betting and maybe just flatting or shoving, depending on stack sizes. Here it would be a flat. If you have been really aggressive though, then by all means, go ahead and make it 7 blinds, because you're going to get action if you make it 7 blinds, if you've been super aggressive. So I think just keep that question in the back of your head in these spots.
I think if I'm seeing right, I have like 30% 3-bet so far in 20 hands, so that's like, I don't know.
Oh, then
I've done
absolutely,
it,
for sure,
yeah.
go for it. Yeah.
And also, if the stacks were shorter around the table, I would flat more like comfortably.
You might get a reshove more often. I think.
Yeah. But there's no under 30 blind stack, so.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying though. That's why it's good to be, stack size aware. Like that should change things. Like it's good to have a plan for what we do at different points, but you immediately need to look at stack sizes, positions, and then those will be like the tiebreakers to, your decision. Like you don't have to always do one thing. You need to look at the variables. And yeah, I like how you said that.